welcome to this webinar, and we're at Digital Green are really excited to have you all here for this webinar titled Making Gender Visible in Agtech Opportunities and Challenges for Women Farmers in this Digital World. I'm Namita, and I'm the Director for Strategy Knowledge Management at Digital Green, and I'd be facilitating this webinar. We have speakers representing academia, international development organizations, startups, philanthropic organizations, as well as the from the government. And you'll get to hear a wide range of voices on the topic of gender and Agtech, and listen to hopefully some really, really enriching discussions as well, which we hope can guide further the work in engendering Agtech. To begin the webinar, I'll now call upon Rikin Gandhi, Executive Director, Digital Green, and provide opening remarks. Rikin.
Thank you so much, Namita. And I really want to acknowledge and appreciate all the my fellow speakers, as well as all the participants for joining today's important conversation. I think we all recognize the real critical role that women have played in agriculture, and in fact continue to increase their role, as more than 80% of farmers in agriculture are women, and more than 84% of women depend on agriculture as a major source of their livelihoods. And of course, those trends are only increasing as land continues to mostly be transferred through inheritance to males. And women often are stuck in this cycle of being laborers, often in agriculture, and often having to take on tasks that involve significant amounts of drudgery, whether that is weeding or harvesting types of operations, and have limited sort of land tenure and very small percentage points of access to formal credit. There's, of course, been significant movements like of the government of India's work with the National Rural Livelihood Mission and its state rural livelihood missions that we'll hear from today to mobilize women into women's self-help groups to build their collective voice. But there still is relatively limited data about women's roles, even in farmer producer organizations that some of these self-help groups are being transformed into. And women ultimately have had limited roles in the governance of these institutions. Now, what we wanted to focus today's conversation is what are the opportunities of digital technology and agri-tech in trying to change this status quo. And certainly digital technology does provide opportunity, but I think we should also recognize that it could also exacerbate existing asymmetries of power. As we know, women still have only 15 to 20% of access to phones. And though that divide is beginning to close in some ways, there still, of course, remains significant inequities with respect to literacy rates and digital literacy and confidence. I think what's encouraging, though, is to see that in certain spaces, women are using certain types of features, for instance, voice memos on WhatsApp or image sharing apps, and in some cases beginning to leverage them to create their own businesses and be able to communicate and connect with one another. I think in our own work at Digital Green, what we've really recognized is that it's not just about reaching women, but it's really about seeing how we can take a more deliberative approach to engage whole families and communities. And to share one anecdote from my own personal experience when we were just starting Digital Green back in 2006, we were working in a set of villages just outside of Bangalore, India, with a community in which a widowed woman had been ostracized from her main community, physically to the outskirts of that community. And we featured her in a video showcasing a biofertilizer concoction that she had innovated upon, and shared that video with her peers in her village. And initially, those villagers questioned what do we have to learn from her? But after asking some questions and actually visiting her in her on her farm, new bridges were built between this woman and her wider community to say that maybe there is something that we can learn from her, and that she does have a voice in our broader community. So that's the opportunities that I think digital technologies can also enable. Our emphasis on gender is really not solely focused on how do we, in our work with farmers and partners, but it's also something that we really take to heart in how we operate internally as an organization. And certainly we are still very much a work in progress in terms of internalizing how do we ensure that we bring our own equitable and inclusive set of voices to what shapes our internal policies of compensation and travel, and not just relegate how we engage women and men and youth from the vantage point of a gender specialist, but a whole organization type of approach and strategy. And what we've seen is that technology is really not a gender neutral mechanism. It's a disruptive force that can amplify positive intentions and capacities, but it can also have the risk of reducing agency and maybe in some cases result in exploitation if we're not deliberate with respect to mapping out the potential unintended consequences and bring in the important voices that are needed to shape our conversations and design policies and solutions together. That's why I'm so encouraged by the new talent and opportunities of ideas and venture capital and government support that are really expanding so rapidly in India in the agri-tech sector in ways that we couldn't have imagined even just a couple of years ago. And why I'm so thrilled that all of you are joining us today so that we can hear from such a rich, diverse group of voices. And I really hope that this will be the first of many conversations to continue to learn and share together on how do we engender women in agri-tech. Thank you, Namita. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ricken, for highlighting, the various opportunities that digital technologies can also offer. And the organization's Digital Green, our commitment to it. I think that the point that you mentioned about self-help groups and FPOs. So we've got Ms. Mansi Nimble with us, who would really share how policy and programmatic interventions really improving participation and decision-making of women farmers and institutions like self-help groups and farmer producer organizations as well. So I'd like to invite Ms. Mansi Nimble for her address and for a special address. And Ms. Mansi Nimble, a quick introduction for her. She is a 2010 batch Indian Administrative Service Officer, who is a notable computer engineer from Delhi with a distinguished master's degree in public policy from King's College in London. She is the principal architect of Mission Shakti Bazaar, which helps in organizing and empowering women-led enterprises through direct market linkage in Orissa. Currently, she's holding the position of State Mission Director cum CEO of Orissa Livelihoods Mission. Ms. Nimble is working on diversifying the rural livelihood ecosystem to benefit women in Orissa. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Mansi, and welcome. And really looking forward to hearing you. So over to you, Ms. Mansi.
Yes, thank you, Namita. I hope I'm audible. My mic is unmute.
Yes.
Okay. And good evening to all of you. My presentation is a very quick presentation of how women play a very important and, as you know, a very significant role in agriculture as well as the overall rural livelihood. So I'll just directly go to my presentation. So I would be talking uh, because we don't have much time today. So I'll be just talking about four important points. One is about how we are having a common facility center at the ground level, how we are promoting the women-based artisans and their produce through an e-commerce website, and what is the role of value chain intervention, which help us to take the products to the market, as well as what are the core livelihood activities which are technology driven and which technology has a very important role in that. So we have about 1,800 community common facility centers in Odisha, as well as we just started this e-commerce website, which has more than 200 products at present. I think it's more than 2,000, but there's a typological error. Then we have developed value chain for women producer clusters and the private producer companies for more than 1 lakh household. And we have a core intervention in a lot of agriculture produce like fisheries, mushroom. I'll just come to the detail in the next slides. So when we talk of a common facility center, so I don't know how far the participant of today's meeting would be aware, but generally you see most of the women, those who are working at the rural level, engaged in agriculture, are generally working as a free labor as part of their family, and they are supposed to be doing the more of the work in addition to their domestic household work which they do. So we tried that we should add those machines, equipment, and the technology in agriculture which help reduce the women's burden which they do as part of their family agriculture labor, as well as it should give them time for themselves to do other activities in their day schedule. So we introduce simple user-friendly equipment which help them to reduce the drudgery of women engaged in agricultural labor. It reduces the time, and there is a lot of skill development which is done through these small mechanic machines and technology in the agriculture, as well as help modernizing the whole agriculture sector at the local level. So these are few inputs which we added, and these machines are basically this entire setup of agriculture technology is available at common facility center in each gram panchayat, so they can rent these machine, use it, and return it. So it is run as an aggregation business activity in the village. So this is highly successful for women farmers, those who don't have enough source and funding to buy these equipment by themselves. uh, my second slide would be I'll be rushing through. If there's any doubt, all of you can ask me at the end of the presentation. My second important intervention which we are doing is, as you know, everything is digital these days. So we have added all the handmade products which are either farm produce or or non-farm produce, handloom, handicraft, artisan item on a e-commerce portal. They are subsequently also added on various national e-commerce portal like Flipkart, even Amazon, and other handicraft handloom portals at the level of in state, even outside. So we've developed this dedicated portal to link the market, to increase the outreach, to give the visibility of women in Orissa what they are making, and directly sourcing from the household and shipping it. So it saves a lot of time of selling those things to middlemen, and then middlemen use it as their own business enterprise, not giving enough credit to these women artisans and handicraft and all these producer groups. And the important thing which leads us to having a good market or a sustainable market is a sustainable value chain. So for each sector, we have built sustainable value chain with forward and backward linkage. We focus on what is, the supply chain, what is needed at the ground level in terms of input cost, machinery cost, working capital, seed cost, as well as what is needed at the front end cost in terms of if some kind of packaging is required, if some kind of processing and semi processing is required. At, so entire front end and back end value chain is developed in a very dedicated way of self-help groups, producer groups, as well as producer companies. So the core activities where we have these whatever activities I show to you, these are just tip of iceberg, I would say, even tip of iceberg, because we do so many activities. Because we had limited time today, I have just prepared 4 slides. So bioflock is again fish farming, where we have introduced these indoor or at the village level household backyard fish cultivation. We have introduced mushroom cultivation. Again, it is a very localized village level, household level activity. Women doesn't have to go very far from their house, can be done within the village itself. And ornamental fishes, which is again at the in the village, in the compound campus of neighboring houses, wherever there is enough space. So these activities which are being done through small technical assistance of any equipment. As I said, there are many other activities which haven't covered because I have just 5 minutes. I was given 5 minutes of time to share. I think 5 minutes I could just cover these. So if there is anything else, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll close my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mansi. I think it's an incredible example of the holistic approach that's really been taken under the Odisha Livelihood Mission as well, and integration of technology, all through the value chain, and addressing a lot of limitations and barriers that women farmers and rural women actually face. We can take a question or two if there are any. I think we have one question from Sarbani, which is what is the role of access to internet connectivity in these interventions? And there is a lot of dependency on connectivity, and it is still lacking in many rural areas in India.
Thanks for the question. Well, internet connection is fairly good. Most of the villages, most of the panchayats, wherever there is not, it's, to your surprise, it is 4G everywhere. But it is not 100%. I would say 90-95% we have internet access. So to my understanding, if we are able to give the market to this 90-95% as well, it's a very good win-win situation. To the rest people, they come to the nearest internet access village, and they interact or take the messages and such like things. If any more questions, otherwise we can go to the next participant.
There is one in Q&A. Where can we get more info on mushroom and fish farming? We can probably type that answer and share.
Well, we would be, if I don't know if I can share the YouTube. We put a lot of our work in our KMS cell. We have a knowledge management cell. So everything, we make short videos in Odia in the local language, and we put it on YouTube, and we put it on various WhatsApp group which we have for the farmers. So I can share that link if any of the panelists is interested. All the skills we have made a no-to, video. We can share that.
I think we'll take just one last question, which has come very quickly, on how do rural women access the market portal?
So basically, rural women don't access the market portal. The portal is being centrally managed by another producer company, farmer producer company. So they have various marketing contact with the district administration, those who in turn maintain the supply chain at the level of producer group and the farmers group. So let us say if there is an order from anywhere and it has to be met. So prior to, like all these produce which has been listed, the farmer producer company have bought it. So whenever there's an order, so they meet the order like that. And time to time, they keep replacing new products, adding more products, buying directly from farmer. So that's how they work.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mansi. We've got a couple more questions, but looking at the time, I think we'll need to move on. And thanks a lot for sharing the work that's happening in Orissa. I think a great example
There's
for all
one
of
more
us as well.
question. Yeah, there's this last question.
Sure.
Manually operated technologies could increase their workload. Well, in most of the cases, we try to use mix of both an automating technology as well as some kind of manual operative. More in case of automotive technology, it depends a lot of on fuel or electricity. So we try to give them a mix of both, so that because electricity and fuel would add to the burden of small farmers which don't really have that much of working capital. So we try to use a mix of both manual technology as well as automotive machines and other technologies.
Thank you so much, Ms. Manskin. We will share more resources in the chat as well that all the participants can access. And I will now move on to share a very quick video on why digital green is really working on gender in Agtech. So Ankita, can you please share the video? Yes, that's why digital green is investing in women in agriculture and women in agriculture and access to technology. And the coming speakers and panelists will talk more about it. I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, and it's my privilege to welcome Mr. Prabhat Pani. He's the Executive Director of Center for Innovation and Sustainable Development at the SP Jain Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. He's also associated with the premier philanthropic organization Tata Trust as a senior advisor for partnerships. Welcome, Mr. Prabhat, and over to you.
So, honored chief guest, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and good day to those of you who are on a different part of the world. Uh, Thank you to the Digital Green team for giving me an opportunity to share my views on what is an extremely important subject, very close to my heart. I thought before I draw upon my experience of having worked with Tata Trust, let me share a little bit about what the SPJN Center for Innovation in Sustainable Development, which is a newly set up center, does. It works towards the creation and dissemination of new knowledge and research around sustainable development and identifies innovative and technology-driven solutions which can help in sustainable and inclusive growth. This is done through synergistic partnerships between academia, researchers, businesses, civil society, and policymakers. And for starts, we picked up 3 areas to explore. The first of which is showcasing impactful work of social sector exemplars. The second is showcasing emerging technologies towards meeting SDGs. And the third is on expansion of a well-defined social entrepreneurship ecosystem. Let me now move to talking a little bit about what Rikin referred to, the impact investing in Agtech in India. This is from a recent report released by the Impact Investors Council. What it shows is that of a total of about 7 billion US that got invested in 2021, close to about $1 billion was in Agtech. Next only to financial inclusion and health tech. That's not too bad. However, this is a little more worrying and possibly linked to the theme of today's webinar. The fact that from a 27% of the entities, the social enterprises having either a founder or a co-founder who's a woman, this number has actually dropped to 13%. And clearly, this, in addition to many other things, are areas which need to be tackled going forward. Let me now quickly move to some of the learnings from what's really happened on the field. And I'm going to pick up 4 different examples from India and possibly look at also some from around the world. If you look at the key drivers which have actually led to women in agriculture adopting digitalization, then there are some very good learnings from Andhra Pradesh. In the course of the last 15 to 18 years, we've actually seen a very significant improvement in the participation of women in agriculture in AP. And some of these key drivers are the fact that they have a very strong institutional structure, SERP, which is the Society for the Elimination of Rural Poverty, covering a very large part of the state, many self-help groups and federations and machinery, which works very well, supported by the Andhra Pradesh government. During this period, they've also used many levers to help the empowerment. Existing devices and applications, locally created video learning platform, both online and offline, and Digital Green has very clearly been a key partner there. And given the fact that while things have improved lately, there has always been an issue related to power and connectivity. They've always focused upon alternate sources to make these available. In terms of the human development, in addition to the video-based learning platform that I talked about, they've also supplemented this with village gurus, clearly recognizing that the whole process of change management requires patience, commitment, and expertise. And clearly, one of the reasons why this has worked is that the economic benefits of the platform are visible through benefits on procurement, quality control, and payment. And this has also led to actually the evolution to the Ajivika, which is now the national level program serving a similar purpose. The story from Bihar, which started maybe a couple of years after Andhra Pradesh, is somewhat similar. Again, a very strong institutional structure through the Rural Livelihoods Mission, commonly referred to as Jivika. Huge focus upon capability building for all people connected with the project, whether it is people with the community institutions or the cadre, as well as Jivika staff. Again, partnerships were a big help. World Bank, BMGF, in terms of putting it into place. And once the market access part came into place, it was people like Olam and ITC, NCDX, and many other entities which helped. I'll now pick up a program with which I was personally involved with when I was with the Tata Trust. This is a program called Internet Sathi, which was in partnership with Google. In a period of around 4.5 years, it actually brought about digital awareness to 33 million women in 300,000 villages in India. Please remember, this is the period between 2015-16 till about 2018-19, when we started, only 1 in 10 internet users in rural India was actually a woman. And some work that was done in 2018 indicated that 2 out of 10 Internet Sathi beneficiaries actually had started to use some form of digitalization in their own business, and they were earning an average of around 4,000 rupees per month. And when we did research between a control group and the intervention group, that table on the right bottom actually shows the difference, whether it is on upskilling or health or government information and agriculture. And clearly the learnings here in making sure that the woman actually took up digital usage in whatever she was doing had a few elements which are useful to know. It was the trainer model. The training had to be imparted to the women at their pace in small groups and at a timing that was convenient to them. So the Internet Sathi, who was actually the trainer, sometimes would do it, let's say, late morning with one group of women. And with another group of women in the same village, she would possibly do it post-lunch because they were free at that point in time. Devices were short, and the Sathi actually had 2 devices with her, but she made sure that it was being used by the people who were actually being, in a sense, trained. So over a period of 6 to 7 months that she interacted with women in her own village and in neighboring 2 or 3 villages, they were actually able to become as proficient as led to the kind of things that I spoke about earlier. Many of them actually started using them in their micro enterprises and saved enough money to buy a phone of their own. Many of them actually participated in behavior change campaigns or some form of research and started earning some money from that. And clearly, scale here was achieved through partnerships, including with organizations like SERP that I spoke about earlier. Another example of a program called Lakpati Kisan, which is by an entity called CINI, which again is an associate organization of Tata Trust. It operates throughout the value chain and brings in elements like entrepreneurship, high value agriculture, livestock, irrigation, and so on and so forth. Again, here, the key difference was that there was a very patient period of spending time with women because they were seen to be the key people in this whole process. getting them to become familiar, getting them to understand how to operate, and not only adopt other forms of technology, which became very important, like, say, mechanized tools, drip irrigation, vaccination for livestock, and so on and so forth, but also elements of digitalization, which provided them market access to get to know the rates in the neighboring mandis and the likes of them. If I were to just look at what's happening in some other parts of the world, the experience, I would say, is not dramatically different. If you look at Africa, again, the proportion of women founders in Agtech is pretty low. But the good part is there seem to be a number of programs which now are focusing upon supporting women founders. Nepal and Nigeria, drip irrigation, for example, women dominate that space. In Guatemala, where a school feeding program has been picked up by the government, both to support eradication of or combating malnutrition, which is rampant in that country, unfortunately. They are actually using a digitized platform to promote local food farming, and it's women agripreneurs who are actually the key players there. If we have to look at some of the key barriers which actually come in the way of women, let's say, becoming more proficient and economically stable through their participation in agriculture, it's areas like hiring men as labor is a huge challenge. Participation in market activities and lack of access to local markets. And clearly, this is something that's applicable to India too. So we've talked about some of the things which seem to have worked and some of the things which continue to be barriers. So what could be some parts of the solution going forward? First is fairly clear that development organizations need to support female founders in the Agtech space. But let's look at some of the other things which I think were far, let's say, clearer in terms of the experience in India. I think leveraging institutional structures, either directly, like SERP, like Jivika, or through an intermediary. An Internet Sathi is an example of an intermediary. That is clearly a very significant way of being able to reach digitalization to women. Second, I think we need to create platforms for entrepreneurship and or communities. This not only brings about economies of scale, but endorsement and support from other members of the community to adopt and to use the different features is something which comes in through a platform. It also allows a whole host of people, including small entrepreneurs, to actually plug and play. And clearly, it addresses some of the gaps that we spoke about earlier: engagement with local markets, cash payments and loans as part of financial services that they can avail, labor-saving assets that Ms. Mansi spoke about, and many other of the gaps that we enumerated earlier. Clearly, there is a huge need to invest in human capital at multiple levels, whether it be some of the office bearers of the farmer producer organizations or individual members. Self-help groups and farmer producer organizations actually support versatility. If you notice, as many of these organizations were actually set up in the very early period to support some form of financial inclusion, providing loans, collecting back loans, and linkage to some financial institutions. But they have now gone into multiple areas. If you look at the role of the self-help groups in the Swachh Bharat mission, it was very significant. If you look at, let's say, banking correspondents today, many of them are linked to self-help groups and women. So clearly, investment in human capital will support a gig economy-based flexible work model. The key demand in any form of intervention, especially in rural India, is really providing last mile service delivery. And this entrepreneur model is something which the investment in human capital can provide. Even development of apps to tackle local requirements and local needs, this is fairly easily done and is starting to happen in many parts of the rural India. I think the next one would be to create and creatively use localized content. I think Digital Green has clearly shown the possibilities that exist here. It's a very unique pedagogy and the delivery mechanisms are different, and this needs to be taken forward in a big way. And the last point, of course, is to forge partnerships. I hope some of this provides food for thought and is taken up during the course of the panel discussions today. But more important, the discourse needs to go on, because if rural India has to transform, then the household has to transform. And if the household has to transform, it's the woman who has to be helped to transform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prabhat. Really ended on a strong note. And I think you've also shared very strong examples of how gender inclusion can actually impact things. Taking example of AP Jivika and other such initiatives that you've been a part of, even when access to technology resources has been limited. And again, the OLM example has been one of those as well, which Mansi shared. So there are, while there are a lot of existing challenges, there are opportunities as well. I think that's what the next panel is now going to talk about as well. Taking a larger perspective on both the potential and the challenges that exist when you work with gender inclusion, when you try to include gender in technology, in design interventions, in your programmatic interventions as well. So I'll hand it over to Alicia, who is Vice President at Digital Green and would be moderating this panel. So over to you, Alicia. And thank you again, Mr. Prabhat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really rich discussion here, and I'm excited for this panel to bring more richness and more sort of specific examples of how we can apply a gender lens in ag tech. We are short on time, and so what I'm going to do is actually do a high-level kind of explanation of our panel participants, and then I'll give you a little bit more as I go through each person to make their opening remarks. So our overall panel today will be, the first speaker is Chiara Kovarek. She's a program officer at the Gates Foundation. Luan Neo, who is Director of Partnerships at IDEO.org. And Revathi Koligala, who is a governance strategist and also Executive Director of the Regen Foundation. I'll give you a little bit more about each of them as we go, but that's our distinguished panel today. So a lot of really rich experience across organizations. So Chiara, I'm going to ask you the first question, but just before I do, Chiara, in her role, works with program officers and different organizations that are grantees to integrate gender in the design and implementation and evaluation of programs. She gets a lot of exposure to many different programs and interventions. And so Chiara, I wanted to go to you first to give us some examples of the innovations that you're seeing across the different programs and partners that you work with, and also how you're thinking about measurement and learning with regard to gender sensitivity and gender transformation in programs. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks so much, Alicia. It's really great to be here. I think, as everyone on this call knows, women are heavily engaged in agriculture, but being engaged in agriculture does not necessarily mean that they're empowered by it. And at the Gates Foundation, we define empowerment as the expansion of choice and the strengthening of voice through the transformation of power relations. Within our agricultural development team, we do have a strategic goal focused on increasing women's empowerment in agriculture. So we're constantly thinking about how we can expand choice and strengthen voice. I do think that digital technologies have the potential to empower men and women farmers. They can give farmers important information that enables them to make choices that they had not previously had about things like where to sell their harvest or where to purchase inputs. And they can also help to transform power relations by giving women their own financial tools or helping them to overcome time and mobility constraints. But they're not a panacea. And as we saw in the video that Namita shared, women are often less likely than men both to have access to digital technologies, but also to face high barriers to adoption of whatever best practices might be shared via those technologies, often due to underlying social norms. To ensure that as digitization increases, gender gaps aren't widening, we really need stakeholders to be intentional about working with women and designing products and services with them that meet their unique needs. And we also need to recognize that women are not a homogenous group and that the technologies that they need will differ based on their life stage, their education level, their geographic location, and a variety of other factors. Our team supports a lot of programs working directly with women farmers. So I'd like to share a few examples of partners that have been really thoughtful in the way that they approach inclusion of women farmers. One of our partners, the Mozilla Foundation, through their Common Voice project, is focused on enabling data collection, model development, and integration of voice technologies in digital applications that are relevant for low-income populations in Africa for finance and agriculture use cases. And this includes work to develop conversational interfaces in commonly used languages like Kiswahili. Many traditional applications and technologies require users to be literate, and unfortunately, literacy rates for women dramatically fall behind those of men. So this program is an opportunity to provide information in a form that might be more accessible and usable for women farmers. But it's also contingent on women accepting the technologies. And because women's voices are not as common in open source data sets, the Mozilla team is working on sourcing more voice contributions from women and putting together open source language models that can recognize women's voices. I'd also like to acknowledge Digital Green, the host of this event, who's been quite intentional about focusing on women farmers in one of its ongoing programs with the foundation called the Digital Agricultural Advisory Services Project in Ethiopia. This program, which focuses on creating a public-led digital platform to support agricultural advisory services, has really brought in a gender focus from the start, including designing different targeting strategies for women frontline extension agents and women farmers. And then within that group of farmers, for women that live in male-headed households and women who had their own households. To your second point about measurement, as important as it is to design products and services with women in mind, it's equally important to measure the impacts of our gender targeted efforts on women to ensure that the programs are having their intended effect and also to ensure that they aren't causing any negative unintended consequences. So we collect a lot of detailed data on women and men farmers through the majority of our programs, both qualitative and quantitative. And we rely very heavily on a measure called the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, or the WEA, as well as its variations like the project level WEA. What's particularly useful about these tools is that they allow for very action-oriented use. They can give you an overall index score, which is useful for comparison between countries or programs, but they also allow you to disaggregate into specific domains of interest, things like time use, decision-making, income, and asset ownership, to give really practical insights into what constraints might be most pressing and where to focus programmatic efforts. Across the board, I'm seeing a lot of increasing examples of private sector and technology providers thinking about gender, both because they're interested in being inclusive and because that they see there's a business case to doing so. I find that really encouraging and I hope it continues. And to support these companies to do that kind of work, we need to have this community of practice of practitioners who have the skills to do it, know what the best practices are, and continue to adapt and refine models as the world changes for women. So I'm really glad that there's this opportunity to connect with others who are thinking about this, and I really appreciate you inviting me to join. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for that really rich starting point. We're so glad to have you as well. I'm going to move to our next panelist. Luan Neo is a director of partnerships at IDEO.org, which is a nonprofit design firm. And she co-leads the portfolio on gender equality to address systematic inequalities faced by adolescent girls and young women. And so, Luan, I have a question for you that actually I'm going to draw from a comment in the chat box where someone said, we're still talking about gender transformation oftentimes in a way that feels top down. We're not actually engaging women in the design process. And since you think a lot about good design and how we can kind of meet the needs of lots of different stakeholders, could you talk about how people can be thinking about design as it relates to gender transformation and really co-design with women and men farmers?
Absolutely, that is a great question, and thank you for inviting me. And it's amazing to be here amongst all these really thoughtful and intelligent people with a lot of experience. So to your question, so when we think about the role of gender responsive design for agri-tech solutions, it's imperative to take gender into account. And in a broader sense, for economic opportunities for women in general, to give them voice and agency, as what has been said already by many of the speakers. So let's take a step back and see, like, where does design come in and how does it do that? So oftentimes people think of design as a form factor, like the aesthetics of something. But actually, great design is about creating an experience for the end user at every touch point, every interaction, and using creativity, imagination, and really great building and maker skills to bring an idea to reality. So if you look around into the world, like everything you see other than nature is actually made by humans. And along that way, like it's designed by somebody, and somebody has been there and made a design decision on that. So everything you touch, even like this webinar today, has been made. It's like it has been designed. This experience has been designed by the amazing team of Digital Green. So if you think about the profile of the person making that decision, you can see like what's their education level, their belief system, the lived experience, their values and gender identities with which they make those design decisions. So if you aim to create design outputs for people that are harder to reach, like to be more inclusive, in this case, rural women, and you do not belong to that group yourself, you need to be really aware of your own assumptions, your biases and blind spots, and your own power and privilege. And you need to be extremely mindful of how that product or service might fit into their lives and how it would lift them up and not inattentionally widen the gender gap, because that can really happen. Like if you bring certain assumptions to a program or a project, there might be like unintentional harm being done. So if we are a design firm, we are very well known for a practice called human-centered design or design thinking. But over the last, I would say a couple of years, we've really been pushing that practice into what's more co-design and community-led design. And that is really about bringing the different voices to the table, or better yet, reinvent the table. And maybe it's not a table, maybe like where are these decisions being made? And bring those voices that are traditionally underrepresented. And really, it's more about, it's not only about the output, but it's also about the process of creating a safe space for the co-designers, in this case, end users, or the communities closest to the end users, the community organizations closest to them, to share their stories, perspectives, and give them agency by really making them, like establishing them as the experts and the decision makers in every step of the process that really shapes and co-owns the eventual output. This is really about shifting power, and it's about also creating a deep investment in and trust with the existing communities.
Thank you. I appreciate that very tangible kind of focus on how we engage communities in new ways, and how even IDEO has been shifting your model of design thinking. So thank you for that. For our last speaker, we're going to go to Revathi Kolagala. Revathi is a governance strategist and an ethical technologist who's passionate about building resilient, empowering collective systems. She's an executive director at the Regen Foundation, which is actually leading a co-design effort to implement a community-owned global ecological commons. That's a lot to think about, and probably people have questions even hearing that, Revathi. And so just thinking about what Luan was just sharing, I'm going to kind of lead into that. You're thinking about and using kind of really progressive, decentralized, novel technologies as you're doing your work at Regen Foundation. If you could just say a little bit about why you're excited or hopeful about the power of some of these novel decentralized technologies as a starting point, as possibly a way to shift power, per Luan's comment, and then also share some of your thinking about co-designing technology, building off of what Luan said, because I know you're working with women's groups right now. So over to you.
Thank you, Alicia. And it's such a joy to be here with all of you and hear from and about people who are really passionate about the space. I feel like the space of women representation in Agtech is not as large as I would like it to be, and I'm really thankful that we are able to put our energy and intentions into this at this moment. My name's Revati. I also go by Rave, and there are two hats I wear that I think is relevant here. One is at Regen Foundation, which is a nonprofit. We are part of Regen Network, which allows for investment into regenerative activities and is simply a blockchain-based ledger, which is a lot of tech jargon. But at the foundation, our goal and personal vision is to use this as sort of a pet tradition, an experiment to look at, can we have the voice of the planet represented through technology, and as an initial step, allow for markets and investment into making sure that the voice of the planet is steered towards positive impact to regeneration and so on. And agricultural systems and land systems are a big part of it. The other hat I wear is as a technology advisor to Seva Cooperative Federation, which is one of the larger women's cooperative federations in India. I co-lead a research project on governance of AI systems and how we can learn from over 3 decades of cooperative governance at Seva to possibly govern technology systems. And I think that's the lens that I bring in here, which I'd like to add to what a lot of the other speakers said. I think being a technologist, I'm very guilty of doing this. We often think of, oh, here's a technology solution, and we need to be training women how to use this, and there's a big gap. We need to think about how we design it with women. And all of that is very valid. But I think there's also really big missed opportunity if we don't think about the other side of the loop. How do we feed forward what technology can help us understand or get inputs on or get insights on into the communities that women live in, into the society that makes up the community, and our human society as a whole. Regen Foundation looks at the current sort of climate and planet as the baseline of where we're at. And it is my personal belief and experience also that women play a remarkable role in this, and agriculture is a very important role of it. And they have a very tangible, concrete say in what the family does, and as well as sort of they sometimes bring in unique perspectives into our own relationship with nature and our relationship with land. And this is especially emphasized when we worked with indigenous communities in Ecuador and so on, for instance, that they would say, if you want the rainforest to be preserved, we have a lot of the elders at the moment who are men, because that's how the society has worked. But in those sects of the community where it's women leaders, we see more of the rainforest being preserved and less deforestation. And I think it's bringing this perspective into technology systems and saying, collectively, when we bring in women maybe represented via internet Southeast, and whether that's via access to information on agricultural tools or access to credit on things that really matter to them and where things are at right now versus things that should be mattering to them and where things should go, and use technology systems to get that input and use that for the society to derive its decisions from, and where we move as a society, where that particular technology system moves. I think that's a really powerful opportunity. At Region Foundation, we are especially looking at women being part of this system that would represent the voice of the planet, but it is based on blockchain, which makes it a little bit more esoteric. But I think the way it connects to this is the fact that most people will talk about blockchain as a trustless entity, in that there is no assumption of there being trust between different parties, and decisions can be made encoded in the way the technology is written, where trust is not required. And that's the theoretical premise that's exciting. I feel like the challenges and the gaps there are a lot. Accessibility is a problem. Like Luan was saying, these technologies are often designed not taking women into account or not taking men into account, but mostly by men. So I apologize. So you often don't account for the importance of trust in human-to-human relationships, and that's a paradox right there. And despite that, we've seen that this can have, with the example that I gave of the indigenous community, real impact on the ground. Women make decisions differently in communities when they have the power to do it. And in short, I believe that, and echoing Kiara here, that we can have technology systems sort of help give them that power if we choose to design them thoughtfully, and also look at where women are not just using them, but sort of co-owning them and deciding the direction of these systems.
Thanks, Revati. Really powerful comments. And I love how all of these build on each other. I said this was going to be a short panel, so it is. We are going to actually wrap up, but I'm going to ask our panelists to end on some final words. You get to decide either a tool or an asset that our listeners could use that you want to point them to, that you either mentioned or didn't mention, something you think that could help their work, or tell me a story or an aspiration of where you think we could be in 5 years if we start to take a more gender transformative lens. So that's the thing to think about. I'm going to give you a minute. To our attendees, I know we didn't get to Q&A the way we wanted. This panel is very rich. Please add your questions to the chat or the Q&A, and I think our panelists will keep watching the chat and Q&A to try to respond to them there. So I'm going to start with you, Kiara. Either a tool or an aspiration to wrap up on.
I'll recommend a tool. So one thing that we recommend that all stakeholders do as they begin new programmatic work is to conduct a gender analysis. I think it's really the first step towards understanding the context needed to design gender intentional or transformative programs.
Great. Thank you so much, Kiara. Luan?
I am going to also share two tools. One is called the Digital Confidence Toolkit that we created. Like if you are a woman or like anybody who is entering the internet for the first time, how do you create that experience as being a positive one and one that they want to keep coming back to? So we've created this toolkit. I'll put the link in the chat. And the other tool is our Gender in Design Toolkit, which is also taking a step-by-step approach, also doing a gender situational analysis, and then along the continuum of gender negative to gender transformative, how can you push your solution more to the right hand side to become more gender transformative?
Great, thank you. Yeah, please drop those in the chat. And Revati, final words.
I would like to open up the space and share an aspiration. I think there were a few recommendations that Prabhat sir mentioned. And things that really stuck with me is the role that digital green can also play, and the folks here can play in sort of making that vision a reality, where we can have tools where women can really be involved in creating localized content, which makes technology systems really real for them, but also helps them make decisions on them, and make sure that this is incentivized through the gig economy based model. I think the Internet Southeast is a really powerful kind of process and a pathway to achieving that. And we are personally experimenting with that at Region Foundation, as well as the Seva Cooperative Federation. And I would love to have a space where we can share the learnings and build that on top of each other in terms of patterns that really work, where you combine all of these together in terms of both design and governance of technology systems.
Cool. Yeah, opportunity for collaboration there. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the panelists. Please, for attendees, please ask more questions. And now I'm going to quickly introduce our country director for India, Krishnan Palashana. Go ahead, Krish, over to you for the next panel. And thank you again to all of our speakers.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It was fascinating to listen to all our speakers so far. And in this session, we'll be listening to some of the top leader entrepreneurs from this sector to gain their insights and listen to their own experiences of designing and driving gender-sensitive and inclusive Agtech solutions. Taking cue from the previous session, I request Ankita to paste the profile of the speakers, and I will not get to that details right now, but it gives me immense pleasure to engage this conversation with Sai, who is the co-founder of Bharat Agri, Soumya, who is the co-founder and chief program officer of KT, and Gitika from Seva, who is also the general manager of FPO Karma Bhumi. I would strongly encourage our participants to check their detailed profile, and their achievements, their career is truly inspiring. Let's now straight go ahead and talk to our panelists right now. I will go with Sai first. Sai, Bharat Agri has been providing personalized solutions and advisories to farmers, offering a basket of choices for the farmers to select. How do you ensure, two questions here actually to you, do you think there is a differential need or requirement by women farmers, and how do you ensure that your app and also the data that you collect are actually meeting those differential needs and requirements of women farmers?
Sure. Thank you so much, Krishnan, for having me here. So as you know, Bharat Agri, we are a platform where we are trying to be a decision-making partner for farmers in India. So, you know, the needs of Indian farmers are varied. We have smallholder farmers, we have, farmers belonging to a mid-range or a semi-progressive, and we have progressive farmers. We are a, green basket of the world. So requirements are at a very different level, but there is a bias of old knowledge which is there, and there are a lot of trust issues, like some of the other panelists also which had mentioned. So where we are coming here is we are trying to bring trust through data-driven decisions, and the decisions where farmers are able to understand it to the maximum extent. So all the solutions and the personalization which is provided is based on soil, water, weather, and a lot of custom parameters which are specific to the farm and also that individual farmer. And when I'm saying the individual farmer, like the gender and what all are the aspects of that personality make it is one of the important data point which we take. So now all this goes as a decision making which is given to user in the form of all the vernacular language. So today we are working with more than 2.5 million Indian farmers. We have a paid solution and an unpaid solution. We have more than 1 lakh live users who are accessing our paid solution, which has a higher level of personalization. And around 20% of these users are female farmers. And we are trying our best to increase this usage and adoption by female farmers. And so one of the special personalization which helps us is the vernacular level customization, and we don't limit it to vernacular, but we also make sure it's the dialect which is spoken, where the user gets comfort. And we have seen this comfort to be at a very high level from women individual farmers. Now, again, with respect to the TG which we target is, we work with farmers specifically who have access to smartphone. Can be a very low-end device of the smartphone, but the smartphone, because our technology is very compatible even with the low-end smartphones. And it is, I think we are very fortunate to be at a right time developing this technology in India, where adoption and active internet population is growing at a faster pace in rural area than in urban area. So we are very fortunate. We are seeing good adoption of our technology. We are seeing good smartphone devices. But the constraint here comes is majority of the use cases which we have seen, which is like more than 75% use cases, there is one smartphone per family. And majorly this access to smartphone is limited to male member than female member. So even though the woman is taking care of the agriculture business in that family, the phone is more accessed by the male or men in the family than women. So that's where we are trying to innovate and trying to figure out how to make sure that whatever information and decision making we are providing, there is access by women farmers also. So by making it more compatible with respect to dialect, with respect to language, and other thing where we are all we are making sure more information with respect to local SHGs, CMRCs, community managed resource centers, where women have special access. So all that information we provide, and it's not only in the textual or normal notification form, it's more in audio visual format, it's more through IVR, where we try to emphasize importance of consuming that information by women farmer, and that's how we are trying to drive the adoption. Other than that, we work with a lot of government agencies. Like we work with Maharashtra government to a very good extent, where their programs where they work with women farmers are powered by our technology of decision making for farming.
Thank you so much. So in fact, it's very interesting to know how you are actually taking measures to build what I call it, a level of comfort as well as a level of confidence among women farmers to access and use technology. Thank you so much for that. I will ask Soumya now. Soumya, Kheti has been offering end-to-end support to small-scale farmers in India, including women farmers. Can you share with us what are those specific design elements that has gone into to help women farmers access and use your solutions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Krishnan, and thanks for having me on this panel. So when we started Kheti, I think one of the biggest beliefs that we had is tech has to be an integral part of agriculture. We started Kheti by understanding the needs of the farmers rather than saying that, oh, hey, we have a product, we need to now find a customer for it. Before we even zeroed in on the solution, we talked to over thousands of farmers, including male farmers, women farmers across many states. At every step of the design process, I feel it is essential that we go back to the farmers and repeat that listening exercise. And I think we have done that with every product that we have launched, every service that we have launched as well. When we started Kheti, we first realized that farmers needed to become climate resilient, for which we designed this affordable and modular greenhouse that we have. But when we kind of started giving it to the farmers, we realized that just giving a hardware alone is not sufficient, because farmers need a lot of hand-holding while using a new technology. Initially, when we started, we used to give a lot of our services in person. Like our agronomists would physically visit, and that time we would make sure that we're spending enough time with the women farmers and the male farmers. But however, this was a limiting factor in the number of farmers that we could service fast and we could service well. So, I mean, in the pandemic, we were actually forced to move to a fully remote advisory model where we had to give suggestions and advice to our farmers through cell phones. We had already used WhatsApp as a medium to drive engagement, but then when we started to design, like, okay, what could a plant telemedicine model look like? We first started understanding who the users were. Like I think Kiara mentioned, like women farmers, it's a very big group, right? So you need to really categorize and segment, like, who are you actually designing for? So we kind of did that. We call our women farmers Vijayas, we call our male farmer Lakshmans, and we kind of understood, like, what are the motivators, what are the barriers, what are the channels of communications that they use, and then started designing according to that. So based on their inputs, we were able to start getting farmers to send pictures through WhatsApp to our call center, and our team could then analyze those pictures, give them solutions and for their plant problems, and deliver about 95% accuracy and give solutions within 3 hours, which we couldn't when we were doing this model physically. But for us, like, I think the theme has been coming from different speakers as well, is the biggest challenge is getting women farmers to start using smartphones. It seems like such a simple solution, but it's just amazing that what a small percentage of women are doing that currently. We have seen, like, women farmers are champions of greenhouse farming, and especially because greenhouse farming is not that back-breaking. You grow vertically, which means women don't have to do very intense labor work, and they can actually just harvest while standing up, and the work also doesn't take more than a couple of hours in a day. But unfortunately, it's the men who are interacting with our call centers, and those are the ones getting most of the knowledge. So we have tried to simplify this by, one, doing more community trainings, like physically, so women can also be a part of it. Wherever we could, we have used video-driven training, so women are able to understand the knowledge without really being literate. We also see that sending voice notes over WhatsApp really helps women, because again, they don't have to read when they can actually make use of the advisory that our team is giving. And we also do basic training on using a smartphone so that they don't feel that fear initially to even figure out. I mean, we never thought that women couldn't find how they save the contact name of Keti's call center in their WhatsApp list. So even making sure that you're removing those biases and training for that. Finally, I also feel it's important for Agtech companies to not reinvent the wheel, because the work of creating an inclusive ecosystem for women farmers is extremely difficult. And that's why we work with a lot of existing players. Like we talked about SERP, we talked about Jivika and Bihar, and NGOs like Pradhan, Tara Trust. These agencies have done a lot of work in collectivizing women. So it's sometimes also just important to realize that our work may be the next logical step. And we can only work with farmers or women farmers that have reached a certain level, rather than starting from the most difficult problem of basic digital literacy and things like that.
Thank you, Soumya. So interesting to know your experiences from the field, and congratulations to the fantastic work that you're doing. Geetika, the next question is to you. Seva works extensively with women farmers and in Karma Bhumi. Wanted to know if technology is playing a role in strengthening the Karma Bhumi operations and thereby translating the results or tangible benefits to women farmers. What are those barriers that you have encountered, and what are those opportunities that you see in terms of using technology in a farmers collective or a FPO?
So thank you, first of all, for the opportunity. And yes, actually, COVID taught us a lot. During the times, like, we were also in a dilemma, like, what should we do next? But so I'll just jot this down in 3 points. Like, the first one, what we realized was that our local seed agri input shops, they were closed. Okay, so there was some specific time that they'll open for only this time slot, and then what the vendors did, they increased the price of the product because they know that now the availability of the product is less. So what we tried to did was to solve this problem. We explored the online platforms. So we connected to Dehat and other platforms. And what we realized was that even before COVID, we were buying our agri inputs of 5% like more expensive as compared to from our local vendors. So they were already giving us like the expensive products. So during the COVID, because technology and digitalization was so trending, that we also started exploring the portals. And we realized that now we are using the Dehat platform and we can actually procure the products at cheaper rates and in bulk amount. And they also do free delivery and stuff like this. There are so many offers and things. So yeah, that was a realization. I think second was that so we have this network of Krishi Sakhis. These are the women who live in a village. They are a bit influential women in the village. So they are our point of contact in that village. So earlier what we used to do is we used to ask them to have collect the demand. So they used to collect the demand of farmers from door to door. Like what type of agri input you need to buy this time, this season, what are your demands? But during the COVID, it was very difficult for them to go door to door. So we use this tool called Kobo. And the beauty of the product is that it can be used offline also. So I'm working in Bihar, Bhagalpur and Munger districts. So network is really an issue here. So we used Kobo, and what it did was we were able to get the demands like every day. Earlier, we used to visit the Krishi Sakhi weekly. So I used to collect the demand like of 1 week demand. But now I can get everyday demand, and it was so updated and it was automatically maintained in a system, in an Excel file. So the data was more clear. So that is also one realization that we started exploring these portals. And I think third, it's not all business, like if you talk about, so what we realized that the transfer of knowledge became very easy due to these digital platforms. So we connected with our Krishi Sakhis. We told them that, that this is COVID and these are the things the precautions you need to take. So we taught our Krishi Sakhis because they have mobile phones. And then because they have such influential personality, they made short videos and voice recordings and they transmitted it into the village. And the impact was visible. People started using masks when a woman from their own village was advising them. They trust her more than the people they see on television. So these were some like noticeable impacts of digitalization that we could see during the COVID times. And yes, it was the time of COVID that we also realized these things. Also, I would like to mention like one thing, that initially I was very hesitant. I was also thinking that maybe my bahans can learn it or not. Will they be comfortable with it or not? But to my surprise, they learned it very quickly, because the mode of our application was in Hindi, and it can translate from voice, it get transferred into a text format. So it was very friendly for them. So I think this was also a thing, that there are some platforms, existing in some tools that are there in the market, but sometimes they're not so user friendly, I feel. So if we try to design a tool by keeping in mind the user specifically and what are her needs, so I think they are quite good at using it. Yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah, thank you so much, Geetika. I mean, I think this is a classic example of how the context and the constraints are actually driving what I will say adoption and adaptation. So well done in using COVID as an opportunity rather than thinking as a constraint. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to move into what, like in the previous session, a rapid fire question. But I can't, I am also compelled, listening to this fantastic speakers, inspiring speakers, that we have to make it into a double-barreled question rather than a single question. So two rapid questions, and I'll go with Sai first. Sai, what is that one thing that you think can lead to a more inclusive Agtech ecosystem? And what is that one thing that can attract more women entrepreneurs and leaders like you into the system? And I'm going to repeat the same question to others also.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for the first question, I think we have to figure out the incentivization for women to adopt the technology, or not just technology, any better access to different ecosystem which is available. That incentivization can be, it need not to be monetary always, but it can be, recognition, can be a simple recognition. Also, all these things, not all, but some of these things, whenever we tried, we have got a huge response. So something like, we tried, district wise, naming a smart woman farmer of a district. That helped us, and then it works like a it multiplies. That has generally as a multiplied effect by giving that small incentive.
Got it. I think, and what will be that? What will be that one thing that you would recommend to have more leaders like you joining Agtech community?
I think Agtech is considered to be non-tech, or one of the bottom of the pyramid sector in India, and in the reality that is not there. I think just maybe conducting more webinars like this, and just making sure people know that it is one of the most diverse, very high GDP, and it is one of the very more number of users can be there in this particular field. So it has very high potential. So just making sure people know about it, and more upcoming women and girls know about it. I think that should be it.
Very good.
That is the only one thing.
Keep spreading the message. Geetika, the same question to you. What is that one thing that you would like that can change, the Agtech system to become more inclusive? And what is one thing that can have more women leaders like you in this Agtech space?
To increase more women leaders, what we can do in terms of technology, how we can help them. Actually, we need to generate this ownership of technology and the importance in women, that this is important. You need to adapt to it, and otherwise you will be left behind. Because what I'm seeing in my areas, kids and these male kids, like they're more attracted toward this technology. Even if the phones that we have provided in our community, what I observe is that the kids of the band, they are using it most of the time for YouTube or not. But so we are trying to create this awareness in our community also, that why is this important for you? What will be the disadvantage if you are left behind? So these types of trainings and sessions, and telling them about the importance of the technology in this time, I think that is very important. And not just them, their family also. We need to educate males also.
Got it. Very good. Thank you so much. Soumya, to you, the same questions.
Yeah, I'll be very rapid. So the first one was smartphones. I've been saying that again and again. The second, I also feel like women having joint ownership of land, I feel that just opens up a lot of avenues in terms of financing, and hence taking more risks. For other women to get into entrepreneurship, I feel just having more sessions like these where women do come together, and we can promote, just a lot of work being done in Agtech on the ground. It's not as difficult as people think it is. It is not only being in the villages. It is also like building any other startup. So I'm happy to connect with anyone who's on the fence and would like to join. And I'm sure everybody here also would love to do that. But yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. So the message is, it's not as difficult as you think. Just get into this sector. Yeah, and here are the live examples in front of us. Thank you so much for this very inspiring, wonderful discussion that we had. And we will continue to engage with you in the days to come. And in the interest of time, giving it back to Namita to take it forward. Namita, over to you.
Thank you, Krishan. A big thank you to all the panelists in both the panels for sharing their insights. It's been incredible listening to you all, and also requesting the panelists that there are a few questions in the chat, the QA box. So if you can address some of them, that would be great. So now we're reaching towards the end of the webinar. We are a few minutes delayed, but hopefully you'll stay with us for just a few more minutes. And now I would like to invite Mr. Nipun Mehrotra, who's a technology and business leader with 35 years of experience in IBM and Wipro across the Asia Pacific region. He was the chief digital officer until leaving IBM 2019. And he's also the founder of the Agri Collaborative, a think and do tank. And he'll be sharing his thoughts on how we can think a topic that's come up repeatedly is collaboration and working in partnership. So how we can actually collectively strengthen the agriculture, innovation, and technology in the days to come. So over to you, Mr. Nipun.
Thank you, Namita. Good evening, good morning, everyone. And thank you for having me, Namita and Krish. And thank you for organizing this wonderful discussion. And at the end of this session, it's so heartwarming to hear the positive stories and the commitment to work on this complex yet extremely vital issue of empowering women farmers. And truly, I think that's absolutely vital to India's economic progress and reducing poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and all those things. These examples that we've been hearing for the last 1.5 hours or so from Mansi and Prabhat and the others certainly give us the confidence that we can solve these things and these things can move the needle. But the reality is that in the last 20 to 30 years, we've barely moved the needle, right? So the collective question in front of me and all of us is how do we come together and collaborate and accelerate this execution so that we can try and solve this within this decade, if possible, right? Lots of interesting ideas came up. What I'm going to try and do is try and wrap up with 3 broad buckets. And it's interesting that the online quiz, and I didn't know the questions in the online quiz, were aligned to the 3 things that I'm going to speak about. So, and I think that can I just share my chart? One second. All right. So, the 3 things that I'd like to wrap up on, which I think are the absolute fundamental building blocks if you're going to make a huge difference to women farmers. The first is, and at CMD, so the first is really access to credit. And a couple of people mentioned it, but obliquely. So let me be more direct on this one. This is the biggest stumbling block for about 80 million farmers, men and women, largely tenanted farmers, largely small and marginal farmers, don't really get access to institutional credit. And a large percentage of that, as we are aware, are women. And the system often treats women as tenanted farmers quite unfairly, even though they are landowners, since the land is often in the husband's name, many of whom are, kind of migrated to the metros and things like that. So there are a few specific recommendations that we've been making, and like to just put that out here. I think RBI and NABARD should do what the government has done for home loans, which is to provide a differential, a lower rate of interest to women farmers. Second, I think we need to also ease the collateral norms for women, right? And just imagine if all the farm loans and the entire credit, which is about 37 lakh crores, is distributed in the name of the woman, right? And into her account, it would significantly reduce the misuse of the funds and enable a huge positive shift in women power. On that note, the Agri Collaboratory, and we are a collaboratory, right? So we work with startups, we work with the government, we work with academic institutions, etc. And we are working on using consented multi-year public and private data flows through a real-time open source data exchange to create an affordable credit assessment. And we're trying to see if we can use data from both private and public and do it in a few minutes and do it for 50 rupees And if we can do these two, then we'll be able to scale that to about 50 million farmers, both men and women, right? Now, credit decisions are notoriously biased against women around the world. So everything else being equal. So I'm delighted to tell you that while we work across several data sets to make assessment gender neutral and to eliminate the bias, we have removed all references to gender as a data element from this analysis, right? Now, the second area is really access to markets. Prabhat spoke about that one, the need to train differently as well as the need to access markets. And while women traditionally have been doing weeding and sowing and transplanting and all the grunt work at the early start, at the early end of the farm cycle, the selling of the produce and engaging the market has been done by the male. Now, facilitating the transition, I think, can make a huge difference to gender equality. So Uttar Pradesh, and you're probably aware of this, but Uttar Pradesh did this piece of work with UNDP less than 2 years back. And they organized women farmers into a collective and they taught them new skills, sourcing, procurement, invoicing, inventory management, etc. Long story short, they had 200 new job roles for women, supporting 120 producer groups and 4,000 small and marginal women farmers. These farmers managed to generate 20% extra revenue from the produce, and they demonstrated that with the right training, women can perform functions that were traditionally assigned to men. Even more importantly, they ensured that once they had a control on the money, it was not wasted, right? And it actually helped the family far more. The last of the three is really digital literacy. And it's interesting how the online poll spoke about access to information, and that was the highest rated, amongst all the participants. So you're absolutely right. Access to information is the huge barrier. With the advent of digitization, and agri is one of the least digitized sectors, but there's a huge potential forward. With that, we should make sure that women don't get left behind. In fact, we need to accelerate the curve of digital literacy for women and target getting them ahead of the curve for men. And how do we do that? Sure, we need to think about open source, farmer to farmer, agri extension services. Some of you spoke about that one. Under the farmer's authorship, very important. And the work that Digital Green is doing with the video, the community-based video education is wonderful. I've been working with Linux Foundation as well to think about how do we bring that open source capability to propagate those learnings, right? And obviously we need to make sure that we're using voice, video, auto translation, auto transliteration, etc. And if you can showcase women-led content almost exclusively, that would be wonderful. KVKs have been around for many, many years. Doordarshan's Krishi Darshan has been around since I was born. And they've been trying for decades, but have not really raised the level of farmer skills. So I don't know whether we can depend on them, even though some of them do some very good work in some areas. I think the time has come to take affirmative action through technology-based, ecosystem-driven effort. Now, let me just wrap up by saying that innovation, I think, has a ripple impact, right? Here's this example about, I don't have the time to talk much about it, but here's the example which was done by, and I can paste the link to this in the chat box, but at my International Water Management Institute. It's about drip irrigation, which everybody's aware about. But the point is that apart from just saving water, it has led to significant change in what the women are growing. So they're actually growing more vegetables. They're generating income as a result of which they're saving time, which they're now devoting back to the family and to talk. It has changed the power equation within the society as well. So let me just stop there, Namita, and turn that back to you.
Thank you, Nipun, for really putting these thoughts together, and bringing all of these discussions together. We've had, I guess, speakers share a lot of their own experiences, like you're saying, and I think the theme that's been coming up again and again is that it is, a strong business case as well to include and think about women in agriculture much more strongly than we do, and it just doesn't logically make sense to ignore them. A lot of points that I think have been shared by different speakers is about being intentional in this inclusion of gender, including women in the from the design making process as well, and actually like co-designing with communities, both men and women farmers, and how the design of the technology systems itself can really have an impact on the power relations. The kind of example that you mentioned, a simple agriculture technology like drip irrigation can also really impact women's lives, and what they're able to then do with the time and resources that they have available. A lot of examples from the startups that we had also talked about how technology can actually be customized to needs of women farmers as well. Just a little thought really needs to be put into what makes it easier for them to use, what makes it a little bit more accessible. And I think lastly, also the use of platforms, the offline platforms that exist can be an incredible source. There've been few comments in the chat as well, right? Like leveraging these existing social networks and these existing platforms of the self-help groups, the common service centers. So even when they might not personally be able to access it, there are other platforms where women can access technology, information, resources, etc. And I think the big takeaway has been collaboration as well. Few people have mentioned how complex the space is, how difficult it really is to sometimes reach women and engage them, and how collaborative models have really worked for them. And at Digital Green, that's, I think, something we are really looking forward to. And this webinar is just sort of like a first step in that process of enabling more collaboration, more partnerships, and we hope to open up more such spaces as well for dialogues as well as partnerships, and plan to follow this up with more such webinars and workshops as well that we hold with other players in the ecosystem. Like today we had like a wide variety of speakers as well as participants, and sort of commit to include a lot of this in our own work as well. I'd really like to thank all the panelists who have offered such, I think, great insights and really given us a way forward as well, right? So I think that's been the most exciting part, and thank you to all the attendees as well. We will be sharing a webinar report as well as the recording of this webinar with you very shortly, and would love to hear back from you over email as well. Our contact email IDs would be available in the webinar report that we shared with all those who attended. So please feel free to reach out to us, and thank you all once again for staying with us and participating. Thanks.